Hello, I'm Sonia, librarian at Stickney-Forest View Public Library. Happy Women's History Month. We have a great program for you. Before I turn it over to our special guest, I just want to mention our upcoming book launch party is going to be April 30th. An author has written a history of Stickney. Linda Malik is her name, and she's launching her book here Saturday, April 30th. We're going to have festivities, and we have lots of great kids programs. We have, if you like crossword, we have crossword on Zoom. Oh, we lost someone. And before I introduce our guest of honor, I just want to mention this Women in History group. It's a nonprofit that brings important women to life. They perform these dramatic recreations of these women. So our special guest is here tonight in part because of this group, Women in History. So I'm going to read the intro. On December 17th, 1903, when Wilbur and Orville Wright succeeded in flying the first free, controlled flight of a power-driven, heavier-than airplane, they thought their success would win them fame and fortune. Instead, they found most people doubted their accomplishment and didn't believe it would amount to anything. The Wright brothers had to travel to Europe to gain the acceptance and support for their flying machines. When they returned to America a year later, they were welcomed as heroes. Another brave American dreamed of finding success in the new field of aviation as well. She also found that people doubted her abilities and told her no when she tried to get into flying school to become a pilot. Like the Wright brothers, she refused to take no for an answer. So she also had to travel to Europe, just as they did, to achieve her goal. Here to tell you the story of how she became the first American to earn an international pilot's license is Bessie Coleman. Let me pin her.
When I was a little girl living in Waxahachie, Texas, I bet you can't say that 3 times fast. Waxahachie. I dreamed when I looked up in the sky of moving out and doing something else with my life besides looking at all those cotton fields that surrounded us. See, if you lived in Waxahachie in 1892, there were 2 groups of people. If you had money in your own land, then you owned the cotton that was grown on it, or you owned cattle and you had big herds of cattle, and that made you rich. But if you were poor, then you worked in those cotton fields and you picked that cotton, or you were what they called a cowboy and you drove the cattle. Now, I'll just give you 3 guesses which one I was. That's right. My family was sharecroppers. My mother and father lived there in Waxahachie in one shotgun house, even though they had 13 children and 9 of them lived. My mama used to say, I birthed 13 children, 9 of them lived, and 1 of them was a fool. She was talking about me. But she knew that I was smart, and she encouraged me, even though at that time, colored children weren't supposed to aspire to do anything but work for somebody else and stay in their place. So when it was time to go to school, like the white children could, we had to come home and pick cotton. School was only open 4 months, 5 months out of the year. And we didn't have a nice school. We had a 1-room schoolhouse with 1 teacher for all the students. But that didn't stop me. No, my mama said, Bessie, every so often, there's a book wagon that comes around. And when it comes, you buy yourself a book. Don't run to town like the other children and buy toys and candy and things like that. That's all right. But if you get a book, it will take you places in your mind and help you get out of this so you don't have to work for somebody else the way your father and I do. Now, my father was really frustrated with being a sharecropper. You never come out ahead as a sharecropper, no matter how hard you work. And believe me, all of us worked hard picking that cotton. Well, see, my daddy was half Choctaw, and it was even harder for him, I think, than it was being colored in Texas at that time. People hated Indians and had no problem with disrespecting you or even killing you, just like they were lynching Negroes. So he'd had enough, and he said he was going to move to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. He said he wanted my mom and all of us to come with us. He was going to have his own land, and he could build his own house, and we could be proud to have our own property and not work for somebody else and never get ahead. But Mama said no. She said she wasn't a squaw and she wasn't moving to no Indian Territory. So Daddy left us, and since I was the 9th of the 13 children, the older ones had already moved on. The 4 of us younger ones had to stay there and try to do the best we could. So on top of picking cotton, we had to take in laundry, my sisters and I. That meant going to the creek or going to the well, whichever, if the well wasn't dry, and pumping out water and putting it in a big iron pot, boiling it, washing those hands on a scrub board with our hands until our skin was raw and our fingers were wrinkled. And then you ironed them out there in that hot, dry Texas sun, and then you put them in a basket and walked a couple miles to whoever rich person's home could afford to have somebody else do their laundry, because nobody wanted to do laundry. But you know, when I would look in those people's homes, I knew there was something better than just living in a one-room cabin. And when I read those books I would buy when I got that little bit of money from doing that laundry and picking that cotton, it did tell me about people like Booker T. Washington, who had started a school after he had been a slave. And maybe one day I could go to that school and make something out of myself. I was smart. Oh, yes, I was. Mama made me keep the ledger when we picked cotton, because most of the colored people couldn't read or write, and they would get cheated. But I wrote down every time we picked cotton how much it weighed, because we had the scale. And when it came time to turn it in, I watched how they would cheat other people and say, you only picked 150 pounds of cotton when it was really 200. But when they got to me, I had it written in the ledger and I knew how much it was. And so we didn't get cheated. And that made me know it was important to have an education. So I scrubbed and washed and worked and picked cotton until I saved enough money and went all the way through our little one-room schoolhouse to go to Langston Normal and Industrial Institution for Negroes in Langston, Oklahoma. I'll never forget packing my one little suitcase. I had a dress, 2 blouses, 1 skirt, and 1 pair of shoes. Didn't even have stockings, but I didn't care. I was going to college. I was going to make something out of myself. So I got on the train and went on to Oklahoma. In a little part of my heart, I was hoping maybe I'd find my daddy, but I never did. I stayed at Langston for a whole semester, just soaking up everything I could learn about history and math and literature, reading stories by famous authors. And I thought, now I'm on my road to accomplishing something. I wasn't sure what, but I knew I was on my way. And then my mother wrote me a letter and told me that the cotton crop had failed. There was a whole plague of boll weevils come through there, and she needed me to come back home and help her with laundry again, to put food on the table. So I packed my bag and got on the train. But I was so popular there at Langston that the whole marching band came back on the train with me. And when it was time for me to go, they played a little concert right there at the railroad depot, right there in Waxahachie. Well, by now it was 1914 and we were on the verge of war. And then when the war did break out, my brothers went north and joined the army. And when the war was over, they came back and they moved to Chicago, and they kept writing letters home saying, Bessie, you have got to come to Chicago. Get out of those cotton fields and come up here. You're a good looking girl. You could meet you a rich husband and do all right for yourself. I wasn't thinking about marrying a rich man. I was thinking about going to school So once again, I packed my little suitcase and got on the Rock Island line and took the train all the way up to Chicago. We had to sit in the segregated car, but I was used to that. I was from Texas. We always knew that colored and white didn't mix together. But nothing in the world could have prepared me for Chicago. I was a little country girl. When I got to the train station, it was the biggest thing I had ever seen in my life. I believe I walked around the streets of Chicago like this for about a week. I couldn't believe how tall the buildings, how many people there were. And the colored folks up there were nothing like they were back home. Oh, sure, there were a lot of country people like me coming up there every day. Seemed like the train station was full of them with knapsacks on the back. But the people in Chicago, driving nice cars, living in beautiful homes with lace curtains. The women were wearing these big, beautiful hats with feathers. We hadn't seen no colored folks like that down in Waxahachie. I said, this is the place for me. Now, I could have got a job in a factory because they were hiring colored girls then because of the war. And then afterwards, they realized they needed us, so they let us stay. But I didn't want to work in a factory. That wasn't too different from being a maid. I want to do something else. So I went to manicuring school at the Burnham Barber College and learned how to give men manicures. And I sat up in the window at the White Sox barber shop, and all the businessmen and the ministers and the lawyers and some of the gangsters too. You know, my brother even worked for Al Capone as a cook. Chicago was something else, honey, let me tell you. But I didn't get caught up in all of that. I was there to make something out of myself. So I'd sit in the window doing my manicures and I would listen to the men talk. Men love to carry on foolishness in the barbershop. They're bragging and boasting and making up all kind of lies about where they've been and what they've done. And they love nothing more than listen to my brother tell lies about going to Europe and living in France and what he experienced over there. I didn't believe half of it, but I didn't say anything. Until he started talking about this woman named Baroness Ramon that knew how to fly a plane. That caught my attention. I'd be filing somebody's nails and just listening while he said, oh, the French women, they're so much more sophisticated than these old country black gals I'm used to. They drink champagne. They eat fancy cheese. They wear this wonderful perfume. And some of them can even fly planes. Now, I got tired of him going on and on about these French women. So one day when he was weaving one of his yarns, I said, I think I want to learn how to fly a plane too. Well, you would think that my head had spun around, fallen off and rolled down the street the way everybody stopped and looked at me. Then my brother burst out laughing and said, ain't no way no nigga woman gonna learn how to fly no plane. He ought to know better than to ever, first of all, call me out of my name in front of everybody, and second, to tell a colored woman what she could not do. I thought about my mama and all the women I grew up with and how hard they worked and how smart they were and how they never had a chance to be who they really could be because people like, even in our own race, were thinking that way. And I said, you know what? You just called it. I'm gonna fly a plane. Well, everybody thought I was crazy. Didn't matter to me. Anybody that came in that barbershop that looked like they might be able to help me, I would tell them my dream. I said, I want to learn how to fly a plane. You know anything about that? Most of them laughed or just ignored me or blew me off. I didn't care. I kept asking. And one day, Robert Abbott, the publisher of the biggest colored newspaper in the country, the Chicago Defender, was sitting right there across from me getting a manicure. I said, Mr. Abbott, I remember down south when your paper would come and we would find out what was going on up north. And now that I'm here, I want to tell you how much I admire you and that I remember reading in your paper about a man named Eugene Bullard, a colored man from here that went over to France and was flying for the French during the war. You know, I would like to learn how to fly a plane. Now, you have to understand, Mr. Abbott was a huge, very formidable, very intimidating man. He was about 6 foot tall, jet black skin, weighed about 250 pounds, and he smoked a cigar. Even his wife called him Mr. Abbott. But I didn't let him intimidate me. I looked right at him and said, I would like to learn how to fly a plane. And he looked back at me and said, are you serious? And I said, yes, sir, I am. And he looked me up and down and said, well, you're not going to find anybody here that will help you. You're colored and you're a woman. And I said, you're absolutely right. Every time I try to get into a flying school, when they see my birth certificate, they tell me, no, we don't take colored, or no, we don't take women. He said, tell you what, if you're serious, you're going to have to go to Europe. I said, well, I am very, very serious. And he looked at me again and said, I tell you what, you learn how to speak French, you save your money, and then you come see me in 6 months. Somebody listened to me. Somebody gave me an idea of how I could accomplish my goal of learning to fly a plane. Well, let me tell you something. As much as I love beautiful clothes and spending money on perfume and silk stockings and going to the movie and going to hear jazz, oh my goodness, Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong, I stopped all of that. I saved every penny I earned and started studying French at the Berlitz School of Language. I got a Victrola and I got the records and I wind it up and listened. Je m'appelle Bessie. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes février. Oh, I struggled and struggled, but after 6 months, I think I had a good handle on it, good enough to get on the streetcar, go to Mr. Abbott's office in that big Chicago Defender office building, take the elevator, and knock on the door. When the secretary told me to come in, I said, hello, my name is Bessie Coleman, and Mr. Abbott said that I could come and see him about, well, something personal. And she looked at me and said, do you have an appointment, ma'am? And I said, no, but tell him it's the girl from the barber shop. He'll remember the girl that wants to learn how to fly. She went, very well. And she went behind the door, and when she came back out, she said, Mr. Abbott said he will see you. So I walked in, and here he was sitting behind this huge oak desk, beautiful Persian rug on the carpet. I almost forgot why I was there. I was so surprised to see this beautiful office. And then I said, pardon, je m'appelle Bessie Coleman, et je veux étudier aviation dans France, s'il vous plaît. And he said, hot damn. You are that girl from the barber shop, and you speaking French. I said, oui, bien sûr, je parle français, monsieur. And he just laughed and smoked that cigar and opened up his drawer and took out his checkbook and wrote me a check to help me buy my passage to France so that I could go to flying school. Not only that, he put me in the paper. He put in the paper all races to get its first aviatrix. Now, you know what I did when I got that paper. I went straight to my brother and held it in his face and said, what'd you say about us and what we couldn't do? I didn't take no for an answer. I refused to take no for an answer. So this time I had enough money to buy a little wardrobe and pack in a suitcase when I left. And I took the train to New York City, got on a steamship, the impersonator, and sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. It was a rough trip, but it was worth it. When I set foot on the French soil, I was so excited. I ran up to the first person I could find and asked them, how do I get to the flying school? And they said, you take this streetcar and the address is Rue de Seville. And I said, all right. And I get there and I knock on the door and I said, bonjour, je m'appelle Bessie Coleman. And they said, oh, Mademoiselle, you are the mademoiselle from Chicago, oui? And I said, oui, oui, c'est moi. And they said, oh, quel dommage. Mademoiselle, we tried to telegraph you to tell you. Last week, you see, we had the two women students go up in the plane studying, and they both crashed, and elle est morte. Oh, quel tragique. So from now on, no more women students. We are not accepting any more women. Sorry, no more. Fini. And I said, excuse me? And he said, Madame, I'm very sorry, but no, it's too dangerous for you women. You could die. Why don't you go home? You're very beautiful. You could become a dancing girl or something. Forget about this foolishness with airplanes. Say, no, not for you. And I said, you understand, I came all the way from Chicago. I came all the way from Waxahachie, Texas, from the cotton fields. This is my dream. I'm not afraid to die. I want to learn how to fly a plane. And he went, oh, alors, ça va. Since you are so determined, go to Le Crotoy. The Quadron brothers, they have a school there. They will take anybody. They are crazy too. Go. So I got on another train and went to Le Crotoy. And sure enough, when I got there, they said, this is very serious business, mademoiselle. You must prove that you are brave enough to become a pilot. It's very dangerous. I said, oui, dangereux, dangereux. And they said, well, if you are serious about studying in our école, first, you will sign a contract which says, if you die, we are not responsible. I said, oui, bien sûr. This is my decision. Bon. And then they said, second, if you are really serious, you will get in a plane with a parachute aujourd'hui, today, and jump out. Oh. Oui. I had no idea that I was going to have to do that. You have to understand, I'd never even seen a real plane. This was all a dream. But what was I going to do? Get on the boat and go back with nothing? So they walked me out to the field where the planes were, and I saw the planes for the very first time. And my heart nearly stopped because I realized they were really fragile. They were made out of very thin wood and canvas cloth. And when we got up on it, there were two cockpits, a seat here and a seat here. And I said, well, where's the steering wheel? They didn't have steering wheel. They had a stick that you pulled to make the plane go up and down. And there were no brakes. There was a rudder in the back, on the back of the tail of the plane that dragged the ground when you landed it. If you wanted the plane to move, you had to move the stick. And you had to feel it. You had to feel it. And that's why they call it flying by the seat of your pants. When you were sitting there, you had to feel the plane, they told me. Well, what choice did I have? I walked up and climbed up on the wing. It was a biplane. So there was a wing on top and a wing on the bottom, and there were poles holding them together. And they told me we're going to go up. And when you get the thumbs up from the pilot, you climb out of your seat and stand on the wing and hold on to the poles until you get a second thumbs up, and then you jump. And then you count 1, 2, 3, and then you pull the cord. Well, we got in and they revved up that big propeller in the front that flew around, and it made such a god-awful noise. I thought my ears would split open. And we started moving forward, and then we started going up. I had my goggles on, and I looked over the side. Oh my goodness, everything's so tiny. Oh my goodness, clouds. Oh my goodness, I'm in an airplane. Oh my goodness, he got his thumb up. I got to jump out. I took my seatbelt off, climbed over, and held onto the pole, and stood there and waited to do the second thumb. And I jumped. And I counted the three and pulled the card. And I floated down like a butterfly. It was so beautiful. There's no place in the whole world when you're a colored woman that's totally free except the sky. When I hit the ground, that was it. I knew I would do anything to finish this course and become a pilot. So I didn't have a lot of money. I had to live in a little farmhouse, and I had to walk 6 miles every day to class. That didn't bother me. The whole time I was walking, I was going through everything we had learned the day before, so I would remember everything I had to do. I would just imagine the whole time I was walking that I was flying a plane, that I was flying over Chicago, that I was flying over New York City, that I was flying over Waxahachie. And on June 15th, 1921, moi, Bessie Coleman, became the first American to get an international pilot's license. First thing I did was wire Mr. Abbott and tell him, I have succeeded, I've got my license. And he said, Bessie, I'm going to have the newspaper there when you get back. So I took the boat back, and when I arrived in New York City, I got greeted by all the colored newspapers, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, all of them were there. And then I got invited to the Broadway show Shuffle Along. Now, nobody knew who she was then, but Josephine Baker was in it, and it was by U.B. Blake and Noble Sissel, and it was the first time colored people had ever been on Broadway. And they invited me up on stage and gave me a trophy. We were both making history, doing things people said that we wouldn't be able to do because we didn't take no for an answer. So Mr. Abbott arranged for me to have a flight show, and I got a beautiful, beautiful costume that my sister Eloise made, and I had learned a few tricks over there in France, and so my first air show, I decided I was going to give them the thrill of their lives. I took the plane straight up in the air and made it spin and come down, and then I took it straight up again, and then I cut off the engine and flew real low, and they knew the engine wasn't running, and I could see everybody in the stands going, there was 15,000 people there, and every one of them was holding their breath until I turned the engine back on and let out a big puff of smoke, and they went crazy. They came running out of the stands and put me up on their shoulders, and they were going, brave Bessie, brave Bessie. Oh, I can't tell you what it feels like to finally do the thing you've been dreaming of and working so hard for. But maybe you've had that experience too. I don't know. But let me tell you, it was a thrill. It was a thrill, but it turned out it didn't make a whole lot of difference because I was still colored and I was still a woman, and nobody wanted to hire Bessie Coleman to fly their planes. So I had to figure out how I was going to get to fly. Mr. Abbott sponsored another air show for me, and that was in Chicago at the Checkerboard Airport. And I wisely chose to charge people for airplane rides when I had the plane, and I charged them $5 whole, which was a whole lot of money back then. People were making $5 a week sometimes on their jobs. But that wasn't going to keep me alive, and it wasn't going to buy me another plane, which is what I really wanted. I wanted my own plane. So I started going around speaking and talking to people about flying. And most of them would come just because they didn't believe it was true. But I let them know that I believed that our race needed to be represented in this new field. And I wanted to train people, and I needed money to do that because I wanted to buy a whole fleet of planes and open my own school of aviation so other people wouldn't have to go all the way across the ocean just to take flying lessons when we had planes right here. The planes were invented here. So I started to make a little money, and I moved out to California because the weather was better there and the skies were so big and beautiful and blue out there. And I got a job here and there flying signs behind my plane, advertising tires and things like that. Then I had another air show because I finally got my own plane and I crashed. I wasn't able to afford a really good plane. I got a surplus Jenny plane from World War I and it was used, and I crashed before I could even do the show, and people were booing when I hit the ground. Broke my collarbone, broke my ribs, broke my leg. But on the stretcher when they were carrying me out, I said, tell them I'll be back. Tell them I'm not giving up. I was in the hospital a long time. My sister came and sat with me and my mother, and my sister said to my mother, well, I guess she's finally learned that this flying is not for her. My mother said, you don't know Bessie. I told you I birthed 13 children, 9 of them lived, and this one is the fool. That's what they called us back then, flying fools. So I got well, and I saved up enough money to rent a plane to fly at state fairs and what they call barnstorming, where you would go to air circuses, and I learned all the stunts because I went back to France and got some more training in Germany and in Holland. And I did the best I could. I went all over whenever I could go to a colored convention or a state fair, and I never allowed them to segregate the audiences when I've had a flying show. No, sir. If you wanted to come see Bessie Coleman, everybody had to be able to come in. It couldn't be colored on one side and white on the other. I like to think that I brought us forward by standing up like that. They were even going to put me in a movie. I was so excited until I got the script, and the script had me with a handkerchief on my head and a raggedy dress talking about, I sure want to learn me how to fly me a plane. I said, Art, that is beneath my dignity. I will not represent my race that way. I don't talk that way. Why would you want me to portray myself that way? And they said, well, you know, minstrel shows are what people want to see. So we figured if we made it funny, more people would come. I said, it's not funny. It's life and death, and I won't do it. So I had some run-ins with people like that, but I didn't care. It was hard trying to make a living flying. But there was one thing that kept me going. Things like this little girl in Florida where I'm now, in Jacksonville. She wrote me a letter and said, Dear Mrs. Coleman, I want to come and see you fly. And when I grow up, I want to learn how to be a pilot just like you. I think our race should try to do brave things, and you are very brave. When you get a letter like that from a little girl, doesn't matter how hard it is to do what you're doing, you keep trying. You refuse to take no for an answer, because the sky is free. And when you're in it and you're flying a plane, nobody can tell you what you can't do.
Brave Bessie did not live to see her dream of opening a flying school for African Americans come true. She was killed during a test flight in Jacksonville, Florida, April 30th, 1926. But her courage and determination inspired a whole generation to go into aviation. And those pilots convinced the United States Army to create an opportunity for African American men to become military pilots for the first time in history. These pilots, known as the Tuskegee Airmen, had such a distinguished record that they were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Bessie Coleman has received many honors as well, including a street named for her in Chicago's Midway Airport, and a U.S. postage stamp issued in 1995. And the Bessie Coleman Aero Club for Women Pilots was formed to encourage more women to become pilots. And now I'd like to introduce you to Sherrie Tolliver of the group Women in History. Ms. Tolliver did all the research and wrote the script for her performance as Bessie Coleman, and she would now like to hear your questions and comments about her presentation. And I will comment first that say that was so entertaining and that was even moving, which I guess I didn't expect. So thank you, wonderful.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yourselves and ask any questions if any of you, I think you're able to unmute yourself, I believe.
Hello.
Let me see. Okay, so you don't have to. But yes,
I would love to answer any questions.
I have a question, Sherrie.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I don't know if it's a question, but it's more of a comment.
Mhm.
I'm going to talk. I really enjoyed that you put in the section about the movie that Bessie
Yeah.
Coleman didn't refuse to act in, because that's one of those horrible things that we white people never thought about. And in books like Caste, where Isabel
Wilkerson.
thank you,
Mhm. Yeah.
talks about I think that's the book where she talks about the depiction of African Americans in movies in early on, and it's just it's really sad, and it's atrocious that happened. But I'm so glad you put that in your script, because it's something that is another little piece that we don't know. That we can be educated.
Well, I'm glad that you appreciate that. I don't normally include that part, because normally I do this for children for the most part, and I usually leave that part out because they don't have the context for it. But as I was going over my research today, I said I need to mention this. So I'm glad. I guess I was supposed to. So yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm just gonna stop sharing on Facebook, just in case any of you don't want your stuff out there, so.
I'd like to just make a comment. I don't know. Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
So I learned a lot. My wife just signed up for the show, and I learned a lot. I usually do at these things, but I was just so surprised to see how you were able to dramatize the whole thing. It was just really moving.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have to tell, since we have how much time do we have?
At least 10 minutes. 5
Okay.
minutes at least.
Did someone else have a question? Okay, well, I want to tell you a very short story. Bessie Coleman is actually the reason I got into doing historical interpretation, because I read about her when I was in college. I was a theater major and an African-American history minor. So this was my destiny. But I read about her in a magazine article, and the story was so dramatic. I said, somebody needs to do this. This is amazing. I can't believe nobody's ever talked about this story. It should be a play or a movie. And so I cut it out and I saved it. And I said, one day I'm going to write a play or something. And then I found out about the group Women in History, and that was it. I said, this is my chance to do her story. And there is a documentary about her. But I just found that out today. And so I'm trying to figure out how to get to see it. But the story is so dramatic, from her going from being a sharecropper and doing laundry and picking cotton to going to France and flying over the German palace and having film of herself. She would go around and show the films. I didn't mention that part. She had film footage of herself, newsreels. And that's how she, was able to make a little bit of money between being able to fly. And I thought, what an amazing story. And it's the jazz age and all of that stuff. So I can see it as I'm talking about it. So I'm glad that it was creative and entertaining to you as well.
Tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like a few years ago, that show on the History Channel, Drunk History, they maybe
yes,
and was it
yes,
accurate?
they did. Yes, they did. And I wish I had thought of Drunk History.
Did they get all the facts right, or?
I haven't seen it. I just saw that they did it, but I haven't seen it. Yeah. It's just an amazing story. There was another part that I hadn't realized, was that Bessie was in Chicago when the race riot of 1919 broke out in Chicago, and it was a week of just, I think like 60 people were killed and hundreds were injured. And these race riots started after World War I, because when the soldiers came back from Europe, having been treated fairly and there was no segregation. And so when they came back, they're like, we served our country, we should be treated equally. And there was this huge backlash against African-American men in uniform and the rights that they were trying to assert. And the next 3 years, there was the St. Louis riot, there was the Chicago riot, there was one in Springfield, I think, too. And she was there for all of that. And I had never even really thought about that until I, again, went through my research again today. And I was like, wow, I guess because of, you know, last year with the Black Lives Matter and all the upheaval, it just made me connect those dots that, you know, literally 100 years later, the same thing was happening. But she was just an amazing woman, and I feel so honored to be able to tell her story.
I'd like to make like one comment.
Mhm.
It occurred to me when you, or when she went to France to learn to fly, that it's probably lucky that it was in France, because if it was in America, she probably never would have gotten in.
Yeah, no, she couldn't.
Different.
Everybody turned her down. Yeah, she tried to go to flying school here, and no one would accept her.
Right. Well, she had the two strikes that she was very well aware of,
Mhm.
and she went to France, and she was still a woman, but being black wasn't as big a deal over there.
Right. And they had already had a black man and a white woman to fly over there. So
That's
in France, right?
the next step. Anyway, thank you very much.
Oh, you're more than welcome.
Yes, thank you,
I
Sherrie.
have one more quick question. Did Bessie Coleman spend very much time in Chicago? I thought I remembered her as being from Chicago, but when I looked it up, she wasn't from Chicago.
No, she
And
was born in Atlanta, Texas, and then they moved to Waxahachie when she was a little girl, and then from Waxahachie she moved to Chicago.
Okay, so she
And
did.
so that was her base. But after she lived in Chicago, she moved to LA, moved back to Chicago, and then she moved to Orlando, Florida. But they consider her a Chicagoan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Lots of fun. Stopping recording.
If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to the Stickney-Forest View Public Library's YouTube channel. Also, like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The Stickney-Forest View Public Library District, where great things happen.